developer meeting. We have a exciting week ahead of us. It's the release of Backdrop 129 in just 3 days. So we're going to be talking about the loose ends that need to be tied up for the 129 release. We'll do some introductions before we get too far along. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm QuickSketch on the internet, and I'm core committer and technical lead for the Backdrop project. We've got half dozen folks here. We've got and we'll do some introductions. So we'll start off with Martin, and then we'll go to Luke.
Hello, I'm Martin Price. I'm a Backdrop developer in Northeast England, United Kingdom.
Thanks, Martin. Luke, and then Jen.
I'm Luke McCormick. I'm a web marketing consultant in Martinez, California, which is near San Francisco.
Thanks, Luke. Jen, and then Joseph.
Jen Lampton, random Backdrop Drupal developer located in Oakland, California. That's it for me.
Thanks, Jen. Joseph.
I am Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and a core committer. Yeah.
Thanks, Joseph. And then we had Laren join us here at the last second. Laren, we're just doing introductions if you have a moment.
Hello, I'm Laren and live in Memphis, Tennessee, and core committer, work at Hatton Design Group.
Awesome. Thanks, Laren. Great, you could join us. So we also have a couple of contrib updates this week. Jen?
Yep, we've got 2 new modules out this week. One of them is Views Timeline JS, and the other one is Tiny Slider. And we have a handful of new contrib applications. Last week, all of the applications we got have already been approved and they've joined contrib. And then we have a couple of older ones we're following up on to make sure they get through the application process. But excited to see all the new people contributing all the work. Tiny Slider, for example, is one of the ones that we had an application for last week. That's exciting.
Yeah, I saw a couple more contrib module transfers this week, not all of which have new releases yet. So
if I understand it right, Tiny Slider was written for Backdrop as well. It was not a port.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was Tiny Slider is like a new JavaScript library that replaces an old one that was in Drupal modules. So instead of taking the old Drupal module with the old library, they wrote a new Backdrop module with a new library, which is really exciting.
That's great. Yeah, not too long ago. Oh, this is actually a Laren module. It was a month ago. I saw that we have a tabled module was created again for Backdrop because there is not a tabled module for Drupal that I could find. Is that right, Laren?
That's my understanding. Yeah, it's a pretty simple wrapper for something I believe your colleagues put together, right?
Yeah, exactly. And tabled is a JavaScript library for making responsive tables, and it's written and maintained by Lullabot, which is very exciting. It's like a Lullabot-owned library that we now use on almost all of our projects. But I was surprised because we always implement it in our themes, right? And so there's no, despite the fact that we use it on almost every project, there's no contrib module for it. But now there is one for Backdrop, ironically.
Silly Lullabots.
Silly Lullabots. Yeah, we work in a strange way sometimes. Yeah, anyway, it's great to see these the new contrib modules coming in and their new contributors. And yeah, these new Backdrop specific modules are always exciting. All right. Yeah, so Backdrop 129 is coming up in just 3 days here. The release date is September 15th. We've never missed a minor release date before, and I don't see any reason why this one won't be just as smooth. The preview release has been out for the past couple of weeks, and I don't think that we've accumulated any new feedback on the 129 preview. Like, I don't think that we found any regressions. There are some follow-ups that still need to be done on the 129 release. We merged some things with the expectation that we would clean it up a little bit before the release. And one of those issues is pretty minor, but and we're close to resolving it. It's issue 6701. And this has to do with the new views handler that was added that we're not happy with the labels. We love talking about terminology. I think it's like our number one thing that we get a lot of activity on in Backdrop is like what to name things or how to label things in this particular situation. But I like that usually we talk about it and usually we get some resolution to it, and that seems to be the case in this issue as well. That we have a plan. I have not looked at the pull request is from Indigo Zella,
It is
which has
updated.
it is
And it
updated.
does, yeah, and it does include the most recent suggestions, and it has been tested by Olaf and just needs code review. So I think we're looking good.
Yeah, it looks great. And I love that Indigo Zella is the one that surfaced the translation problem with the string that we had. So it's really great that she filed the replacement. That's has an implicit approval built into it that that she's a fan of that as well. Great. Okay, awesome. I thought that she just took a screenshot, but she actually made a pull request. That's fantastic. Great. So that's in really good shape. Now, are there any other 129 follow-ups that I missed? I think that might be the only. It's the only one I see in the 129 milestone.
It's the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah,
I
there's
can't
this
think of
other one
any.
that Tim opened that is in the milestone. It's 6705. But this isn't like a known issue. It was like Tim was just looking at the things that we already had and said maybe we could improve this a little bit. This one's hard to describe, so I'll share my screen for it. That when we're talking about, so it has to do with that we added this column here, or sorry, we didn't add the column. We added the visibility condition for paths
The access
to be
condition.
shown. Yeah, but that's what Tim is now surfacing is that these are called access conditions on menu items, but they're visibility conditions when they're blocks. And that's the whole conversation is that it's the same conditional system underneath, but for a menu item, it's called access condition because if you don't meet the conditions, then you get a 403 access denied. So access condition is accurate for a menu item, but then we use this UI that says add visibility condition right below it. And so he's suggesting, oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was just saying, my suggestion would just be to change the global system so that it just says add condition. And then wherever we implement it, we can specify which kind of condition it is, whether it's an access condition or a visibility condition, because we don't really need to say visibility conditions, add visibility condition in like both places. And then if we labeled that column with conditions instead of access or visibility conditions, that might be, yeah, a little simpler. So it's just to sort of simplify it. There's a great screenshot. Might make it a little clearer, or less confusing. Maybe not clear.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I think this is a great suggestion.
So is essentially the difference between an access and a visibility condition, whether we return a 404 or a 403?
Well, a visibility condition won't show a block, for example.
Okay.
But it's not
But you
that
can
you
put
don't
them
have
you can put
access
them on
to
a
the block.
layout.
Yeah. But on a layout, it has an interesting behavior where it doesn't, well, in the case of a path, I guess actually paths are the only things we're talking about. Yeah, in the case of a path, it gives you a 403. It can also give you a 403 if it's on the layout, but if you've got multiple layouts at the same path, then it determines which one gets used. So I guess you might have a point here that maybe visibility isn't even accurate for an overall layout either.
Well, visibility, at least that word, it can sort of mean both access and whether something shows or not. Whereas access is very specific.
Won't you won't you always bubble down to the default layout if you don't have a visible other layout?
Not for a layout at a custom path.
Yeah.
Okay.
That yeah, again, like it starts to become pretty yeah, what's the right word here?
Entangled.
Entangled.
Mhm.
Subtle, actually, I think is what I was going for. That if you're putting a visibility condition on a node layout, for example, that doesn't control like access to the overall node. It will fall back to the default. But if you create a layout with a custom path and
Layout page.
there's nothing else that none of the visibility conditions match, then it will show you a 403.
Or want to show you a 404.
I would need to double check.
I'm pretty sure
That-
it's 404, and then it's only a 403 if it's on the path itself and not on the layout.
That's interesting that is the order of operations there. If
I think
if
that's
that's accurate.
now that I've said that, I think that's what Joseph was asking.
Yeah, I think that's what he said is, yeah, that's what I heard, but I'm not sure if that's accurate.
I'll go test it.
Yeah. Just because we don't have a lot of issues to talk about today, the 403 versus 404 is an interesting topic that I've seen on some websites, GitHub in particular, that if you don't have access to something, they return a 404. GitHub doesn't use 403s because it implies the existence of something at that path. And from their perspective, where they don't want like companies might not want people to know that they have public repositories at a certain location, or it might reveal the code names for new products or something like that. So they don't give you any clue whatsoever about what's at an access denied path, and they just say it doesn't exist, which is an interesting paradigm. I'm not sure that we have anything tracking that, or if that's even a concern. But it is an observation of kind of a different preference for how to handle access denied pages. Okay, let's see,
I've
next
confirmed
issue.
it's 404 if it's on the layout and not on the path.
That's interesting. That really does make it sound like it is still visibility condition, really, rather than access condition, because it's like I couldn't find something right to show you. Not that you don't have access, it's that I just don't know what to show. Because you actually do have access to the path, because the access control is at the menu layer and at the routing system. Interesting. That's yeah, again, a little subtlety that probably isn't important to most people.
It seems like any adjective there just muddies the thing. The condition. It like covers it better than any adjective condition.
Yep. I really like the suggestion here, Jen. Just use condition for the link and change the label above it if it's access or visibility, and there you go. I think actually internally they're only referred to as conditions as well. They're called a layout condition, but yeah.
I thought they were called access, but I might be thinking of panels.
Let me look real quick.
Panels, I know they were access because it never seemed like that was the right name for panels, but I don't know about layouts. Nate would know layouts.
Let's see, it is layout, plugins, access. Yep, just called access. Well, access is the name of the directory and the name of the files, and then internally the base class is layout access. So, yep. Okay. Next up, so this issue is a nice to have issue 6687. for the 129 release. It's a minor thing to improve the admin menu when it overlaps back on itself. Sometimes when you're going down deep into the admin menu, you hit the edge of your window and then it starts going backwards the other direction while it's expanding menus. And it can be difficult to notice the fact that another menu has opened over the top of its parent. And so that's what this issue is for. It's not like making a tremendous change to the appearance of things. It just is adding a drop shadow and a border, and only on the reversed direction. So it looks the same unless you actually start going into that overlapped menu. The only issue with it, though, is that the RTL CSS isn't quite right, but we think we know what the issue is there, so that this could be fixed pretty easily if the pull request gets updated. Okay, and then the other item that I'd like to really see in 129 isn't in the 129 milestone, but Jen just opened this issue yesterday. It's issue 6709. And Jen, maybe you'd be best if you could summarize why this issue is opened and why it would be good to
Sure.
get it done quickly.
So yesterday there was a security release for file entity module, and we have file entity module in Backdrop Core. The very specific scenario that file entity was fixing with its release yesterday, we do not actually have in Backdrop Core. There's something else in Backdrop that prevents that specific problem from happening. But while I was testing the file entity solution yesterday, after the release was out, I noticed that Backdrop still did something that was a very strange behavior. And then I went and tested on Drupal and it did it too. And so I think both projects have decided that we're going to add a follow-up security hardening. And the scenario is if you have a live site and you somehow accidentally delete or move or rename the directory that you had previously defined as your private files directory, then when someone goes to upload a private file, that private file might end up in your public files directory. And so even though the scenario in which that happens requires somebody like has access to your server in order to be able to move or rename or whatever that directory, it is possible that can happen just when moving a site from one server to another or what have you. The default behavior there should not be to make the private file public. It should be to not save the file. And so our follow-up is just rather than saying, oh, oops, we made this file public, which it does, and a big error, which when that happens, so that's not a surprise to anyone, it should just be like, oh, oops, we didn't save the file, and then allow someone to fix the problem and then upload it again. And so that's what our fix does. And if I can get our pull request reviewed, then I'll submit the same thing to the Drupal file entity project afterwards. But because we just had this security release for file entity, I feel like it would be really great if we included the hardening and Backdrop in our next release, because then it will look like we're matching what Drupal is doing. Like we didn't have exactly the same vulnerability, but at least we're adding a hardening in the same area that they just added a hardening. So it seems like the time is right to do that, right?
Yep, great summary. Also, even though this isn't a security release, it would be nice, like there's some ambiguity about, if this were done after the 129 release, would we backport it to the 128 release? And, maybe we backport security releases to the previous release, but security hardening is kind of optional. But anyway, we can sidestep the whole problem if we just get it done in the 128 cycle, which is until the 129 version comes out. So it would be great if we can get this completed in the next couple of days and include it in the 128.3 release, which will come out the same time as 129.0 does. So that's a little priority issue for us that just came in, and I think that we can get it sorted out. It's a really strange small use case. But again, it would be nice just based on the relevance of the timing. And again, the coordination with Drupal, it's always good to advertise the fact that we have that connection and that we're being responsible with security updates. Okay, well, that's the priorities for the 129 milestone. Not a whole lot that we need to get done, but you know, we've only got a couple of days to get it together. Does anyone have any other 129 areas or priorities before we move on? Okay, all right. All right, so the other issue that we've got surfaced for today is one that Martin's been working on, 2231. We've talked about this one a couple of times, and I think that we're continuing to move forward on this. Martin, can you give us an update?
Yeah, so following the last meeting, I've updated the PR, rebased it, and towards there is a I've put it in the in the comment on the issue that what I've updated the documentation to, and just tried to make it clear. Yeah, so just up slightly there. So that's what I've shortened it to, just to clarify. If you need to do any of these things, go to the documentation. Obviously, we'll need to include these things in the documentation, but rather than trying to cover everything in the comments, then I've made it as short as possible. So
Yeah, looks great. Yeah, we'll need. I wonder because the documentation right now only talks about the. Oh, it does talk about the shortened syntax. Yeah. Like so this is the expanded syntax, which continues to work both before and after this pull request if you need
yeah,
to do the more verbose for primary, secondary databases. But this syntax will also continue to work as it needs to for all existing sites.
mhm,
We'll have the question of like I guess maybe it's not even a question because there's legacy sites out there. You know, we'll still need to provide the documentation on how to use the simplified syntax as
mhm,
well. I guess the question is do we want to say that this syntax is deprecated? And maybe that's a question for later, you know, like maybe
mm,
it's not deprecated for now. We leave it there as it is, and then at a later time we say, you know,
yeah.
maybe
I think
let's make it deprecated.
it will be worth when I update the documentation. And I'm not sure how best to draft this, whether to sort of draft it in an issue in the docs queue, and but yeah, we need to document it, but document the shortcomings of that and why we've switched to the other one. So we'll say this one works, but if you have a password that has certain characters in, it can cause a problem.
Yeah, what I think would make a lot of sense would be if this page were purely describing how to update your database configuration the same way it is now, and then we make a change record for the why did we make the change. And change records, like some of them, you know, they're not necessarily changes that you need to implement, but they are like announcements of a sort of like, you know, here's something that you should be aware of. So I think that that would be a good place to put that information. I would probably also not make another issue because this issue, although verbose, does cover the history of how we arrived at this, and I don't think that we need another issue to track the documentation. I would say like let's just go make a change record, edit the documentation page right where it is, and then we just iterate on it if it needs further improvement. Let me see one more thing about this. It's probably been mentioned, but
I
am
have a
not
small
sure
thing
how it
about this I want to
works.
mention when there's a break.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, at the very top of that documentation page, and I think actually where it's posted, the short form description, it was
Here
right
it
at
is.
the you know, user, pass, and database name are generic descriptions of those particular fields. But
Mhm.
instead of host name, we have localhost. We have an example of the host name rather than like a placeholder descriptive of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. We used to have localhost there because that was like worked as a default, but that doesn't even work as a default anymore. So I feel like it would make a lot of sense to switch that to something that is a name rather than an example that won't work.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
in every single one of my sites that won't work. It has to be
Yeah.
a host name.
yeah, you're not wrong, but that's a good.
It does work on quite a number of. I think I still use it on mine, and it does work. So
Oh,
I
it
think
doesn't work
it
anywhere. Just
depends
just
on
not on
the
any of the ones that I
depends
have.
on the hosting configuration. Really, That's,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it doesn't work
Isn't it
everywhere.
like a
It's just
a
doesn't work on.
It's gonna
do you
work
need like a
more
really
than
old
anything else we
MySQL
put there.
version?
What's that, Jen?
Doesn't it require a really old MySQL version? Like there was something that changed recently that made it not work on anything old anymore, which I thought was a MySQL update.
No, I think
Mm,
it will still work if
yeah.
if your PHP and your MySQL are on the same host, it should still work.
No, I had
Mm.
to change all my sites. Like none of my local sites worked anymore after I did some update. I thought it was a MySQL update, but
Mhm.
it might
Yeah,
not be.
there was a change to deprecate the usage of localhost there.
Yeah.
Is it
My
in
my
MySQL or
objection
is that like a
isn't
Mac OS thing?
I mean it wouldn't work in Docker, but my objection isn't that it doesn't work. It's that it's one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah, it might help that the new syntax actually says host here
Yeah.
instead of saying host equals host, or host equals host name. I see what you're saying, but I also see that it's like there's some chance that this line might not to be changed, even if it's like 10% chance.
Mm.
You know, I don't know. It's a minor thing. I would also be inclined to say like let's not tackle it in this particular issue because then like there's a special treatment we have where if the installer identifies these particular keys, then it knows that that's the same as having not been installed. And so if we just change
Oof.
this to something else, then Backdrop will think that you've actually entered in new credentials and it won't show you the installer. It will say your database credentials are incorrect. Which, we could change that code too, but then I wonder about the rolling effect of maybe not new Backdrop installs, but install profiles or automations that might be set up where it's like suddenly the installer doesn't work anymore because we think that the database credentials have already been set.
Do we have that single line in documentation anywhere? Like I know in this pull request it's being removed, but is it like if it was in a doc block, that would be a good place where we could change it. Like a single line.
It was
connections.
that's where I saw it actually. It's on the
I think it was on the docs
documentation
page.
slash
Yeah, like right there.
Yeah, but Jen, that's the most recent feedback was to remove the extra documentation and to just say, just to keep this short because it was getting so verbose, and just be like, if you're doing anything else, go to the documentation page.
Right. So we should fix the documentation page then.
Oh yeah,
right,
totally.
Yeah, like right
oh,
there.
I see. Yeah, that we can change this.
Right.
Because this is no longer relevant. Nobody would paste this into their settings.php and then actually everybody will paste it in their settings.php, I should say. But it doesn't have the same effect that we know that if they're going to paste it in, that they're going to change the strings.
Yeah.
And it's not going to break anything.
That was the one I was referring to.
Yeah. Okay, great. We can totally do that. Just update the docs. Great. We still have a little bit of time here. I'm curious about how this aspect is treated in this pull request. I think that it's not.
I don't think it is, no, but it could do if it's needed. I mean, from my experience, whenever I install Backdrop, it always adds on the always adds on to the bottom.
Yeah, it
of
tacks on
settings.
this. Yeah. And into the bottom.
Yeah.
But that's only if it can write to settings.php. But the reason why it uses this separate variable is because of the string approach here, where it's like database is a string, database prefix is a string, and then database char set is also a string. But if we're using the array syntax, we can put that into the array syntax instead. So that could be char set equals that. And maybe I'm now conflating too much together, and maybe this should be a follow-up. But if we have the array syntax, we have the opportunity to put that in there. And also, I would be inclined to leave that in the default template, because there's almost no databases in existence. Nobody should be using a database that doesn't support that ability at this point.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, and that would just make it so that that additional variable doesn't get tacked onto the bottom anymore. And if I even would say that we don't need to worry about the use case of, like, if they're using a non-compatible database, what will happen is the installer will throw an error saying that you can't use this particular setting because your database doesn't support it. And I think that's fine. I don't think that we need to automate the detection of it and try to remove it or anything. I think that if it's there, you should be getting an error saying that your database doesn't support something. Because really, if I encountered that, I would appreciate the fact that it notified me that my MySQL version doesn't support emojis, because I don't want to install and use a database that isn't up to date, that it couldn't support all characters. So that'll be a nice little thing to clean up. It always bothered me that the adding of the character set variable was down at the bottom of the file and all the database settings were up at the top. So that was just that ended up being the default formatting of your settings.php file for pretty much everybody that was using the graphical installer. So we can clean that up while we're here. If that doesn't derail things.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Izzy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm carrying through well, but one of the issues I have is the collation, because UTF-8 collation, there's a difference between Unicode and general, and just defining the character set doesn't affect the collation. So in order to be able to define both the character set and the collation, you have to use the older D7 format for defining the database configuration. So I'm not sure how else we're going to introduce that. And my second concern is that not having that information readily available to somebody, like in the settings PHP file, creates a lot of problem in terms of having to go link here, go to the documentation. It's not even clear in the documentation. And sometimes it's just better to have a bit more information right in the settings PHP file. So that's where I kind of differ a bit in terms of what we're introducing. I think having a simpler syntax that's more than just 2 lines has merit, but not having enough information readily available, I find problematic.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that for the same reason why the character set should be supported in that array, collation should
Mhm.
be as well. Like it'd be really silly if it's like,
Yeah.
if you want to add one thing, then it's like we got to go to this whole bigger syntax.
Mhm.
Izzy, do you know, is there a case to be made for having like, is the default collation that Backdrop uses not the correct one? I really don't know much about this topic about database collation, so you can help me out here.
Well, I don't profess to know much about the collation, but the default seems to be UTF-8 general collation, and yet the recommendations I keep coming up with it should be Unicode. So I'm not an expert there, if that's where we want to go. Backdrop doesn't default to Unicode, because if you upgrade a D7 site, which may be using UTF-8 3 rather than 4, Backdrop will politely offer to update it through the status page, and it does that, except it uses the generic collation. So it raises that exact same question: which is the right way to go? Is it general? Is it Unicode? Unless you specify Unicode, you won't get that.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like that's kind of an open question, because I don't know, at least I don't have the information to answer that. But I do think that both supporting collation and the char set type in the new
Mhm.
syntax is a good idea. And
Yeah.
also the database configuration, you're right, the collation isn't mentioned anywhere in here that I can find. And I think that might be solved just by updating our documentation. Yeah, that would be great. I don't know if we need to include collation by default as like in the short syntax. Like I think it should be supported so that if you add collation, it works. But I'm not sure if we need to add a line for collation in there. Thoughts?
I think if it's not added and then we use a reasonable default, that's kind of what people would expect, right?
Mm. It's like what we do in the comment where we say if you need to customize the port prefix or driver, we could add in
Collation.
there the are we saying we should have character set actually appearing? No, sorry. Was it? Yeah, it was character set in the defaults, so appearing in that simplified array, or should it be default? So within the PR, we use some of the defaults that are. So, for example, prefix has a default of a blank string. Driver is MySQL. Port is the standard the standard default. Should we do the same for character set, where we set the default in the background but give people the option to override it, or should we put it in that base template?
Yeah, I was originally suggesting that we do put it in the base template, but based on what I've just said, that everybody should be using the newer one, that would make way more sense if it was just the default.
Yeah.
Now, this gives us an opportunity, because we're now saying if this database variable is an array, then we populate a whole different set of defaults. If it's a string, then it looks for the separate variable. And so this would be a great opportunity to also make it so that our defaults are better. So I'm a fan of that. Like let's not put char set in there. Let's not put collation in there in the simplified syntax, but let's support them as being overridable and put that in the documentation.
I did in the other issue where I had put a more verbose thing in there in the PR. I do use just a couple of lines to address this question of both the special characters in a password and also the use of UTF-8 character set and collation. So, you know, those comment lines might be helpful to add into this PR that is on the 2231.
Or would they be useful to add into the documentation? Because we are trying to keep the documentation down in the settings file.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I agree with I hear what you're saying. I'm not on the same page as that. I think the settings file needs to have enough information in there to help someone know whether they can do this or whether they need to dig deeper. I think having it 2 steps removed, to me, that's more awkward. But again, it's just adding, how much do you add in here without overdoing it? So there are a couple of lines there. You can take a look and see if that adds to what you're doing with this PR or not.
Yeah, but we've already addressed the special passwords with that simplified array, so we don't need to worry about that. And if we cover the fact that you can change the character set and collation in that list of things that you might want to change. So where we say if you need to customize the port prefix or driver, we can also include character set and collation in there.
Right.
Then that will, I think that gives the same information.
That'll cover it.
Yeah.
Yep, I think you're right.
Great. Consensus. Yeah, and a better solution. And we get to eliminate that stupid extra variable. Now I've gone from like, yeah, this is kind of like a nice little improvement and the password problem will go away, to being like, heck yeah. This is great. Because now it is a little bit funny that it's like it's not even that much different in terms of like code lines, which I know is not terribly important, but between the database string, the prefix, and the character set, we were already up to 3 lines, and the array syntax is 6. So, yeah. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, love it. Okay. That's all that we had for topics for today, and we're just about out of time. Does anyone have any last comments or questions? Okay, well, let's wrap it up for today then. Really appreciate you folks showing up today, and of course for all of the work that you and all of our viewers do on Backdrop every week. So thanks so much, and we'll see you all on the other side of 129. So